My goodness. There's a lot of ways we could start today, but the Alabama-Georgia game, and we will get to the radar from the Big 12 because it was quite the weekend. I can't – anyone that thought the college football playoff would lessen the regular season or thought it might change, maybe it was just a once-in-a-lifetime game. But what Georgia did to come back, and then Milroe deep to Williams, the 17-year-old, and then the pick in the end zone from another freshman, what an unbelievable game. And I don't know, can anyone top that the rest of the year?
Oh, I mean, it's going to be tough. I mean, I think we'll have many opportunities, but those are two of the best teams in the country playing right now. I did not get to see any of it live. I saw all of it via highlight because it was on the same time as another thing I was doing, which you don't have to talk about. But that was, I mean, that's college football at its best. You got to see Jalen Milroe really kind of put his name legitimately into the Heisman campaign. Everybody has to worry that Ryan Williams has 2 more full years in the SEC before he's eligible to go to the NFL. There's just so many great things to like about that game. First half, just following along on my phone, you thought like, oh man, these injuries and all this stuff with Georgia has kind of gotten to him, and Alabama came to play, and then Georgia just said, no, we took the first half off to heighten the drama, which is kind of what they've done. They did against Clemson. They didn't play great in the first half. Against Kentucky, didn't play great in the first half. But this is a second half team, and they made it show the other night. But Alabama comes out on top.
Yeah, it was an incredible game, and it will definitely get topped. I mean, I'm sure there were people after Baylor, Colorado, and that finish going like, how are we going to top this? And it's like, oh, it took 7 days to top that. So, I mean, being not even halfway through the season, it'll be difficult. But I have a feeling we're going to see that topped, and then whatever tops that get topped. And I don't know how many times you can top that, but that was an incredible game. From the standpoint of it was a big comeback. It wasn't a great back and forth in the first half because that was seemingly all Alabama, especially that first quarter. But, Milroe and the Tide just jumped all over them. And I think that even though they've replaced Nick Saban, they brought in a guy in Kalen DeBoer who's not scared of the big game, who actually thrives in it and is always well prepared for it. And I got that feeling within minutes of watching that of like, yep, like Kalen DeBoer's got them primed up and ready. And Alabama's not missing too much without the legend on the sidelines. Now, can they ultimately accomplish as much? Like, we'll see over the coming years, but I don't think that there was too much of a drop-off in terms of, like, their level of elite. And if anything, Jalen Milroe jumped up a couple of levels of elite. He was sensational, especially early in that game. Great fit for this offense, and that was just a lot of fun. I mean, you mentioned the picks, and I had probably my worst week with the picks. There's a lot of just tough games to try and decide, and I picked Georgia ultimately, and early on I felt like such a doofus, like, golly, like I totally misread this. And then by about the fourth quarter, I was like, wow, I know what I'm talking about. This is going to be a great come-from-behind victory, and I'm going to get this one right. And then Bama obviously steals it away, but, Carson Beck played terribly at times, and then he looks like he's going to be the hero at the end. I mean, there was just so many elements of that game, and Ryan Williams, the freshman, was absolutely incredible, and now on the college football radar for a lot more people than he was heading into this week. And if you follow recruiting and the SEC, you already knew all about him. But that was a party for Ryan Williams, a breakout party on Saturday. So, yeah, we're going to hear a lot of him over the next couple of years. But, I mean, there was all those elements and even more to that game. And it was special, and it was fun time watching that on Saturday.
A lot of games to get to, but that was the one, and it was neat because I could just sit there and watch it, which I don't get to do much because there's always something in between going to do a post-game or a pre-game or watching a game or covering a game. Here's the AP Top 25 poll. This is the Associated Press. This is the media poll. There's also the coaches poll. Alabama is 1 in the AP poll. Texas is 1 in the coaches poll. And then, of course, there you have Texas, Ohio State, Tennessee, Georgia. In the coaches poll, it's Texas, Alabama, Ohio State, Tennessee, and Georgia. So the only difference is Alabama, Texas are flipped between 1 and also number 2.
See, here's what I believe on that. The coaches don't believe that you should drop a spot if you win by 22 in the SEC. And the AP says, well, if you beat the number 2 team in the country, then you go to number one when the number one team plays Mississippi State.
I also think it has to do with one of the few logos in college football that is at the same level, or maybe because of the last several years, the last 10 or 12 years, even with last year's win in Tuscaloosa, it's one of the few logos that would jump them.
Yeah.
Yeah, all-time Bama's a bigger logo in football than
yeah,
Texas is.
yeah.
I mean, they might not have as many fans or whatever, but they're in the competition for every single category. And the on-the-field stuff, like they get the check mark in a lot of those categories, especially national championships. So, yeah, they've got that type of identity that they could be somebody to jump an unbeaten Texas, but that's a very small group, and I don't even know, like, if there's even – more than two others, if even that would fit into that group. But I think that's the excitement of the voters. I have no problem if you stay with Texas at number one, though, because
no, not at all.
They handled their business. They're making it look relatively easy, even though I know that was a slow start against Mississippi State, and there was probably a little bit of concern early on of like, oh, shoot, was this a trap? Like, because they're so bad, like, did we not see this coming? But they dug out of that and were able to win convincingly. But, yeah, I don't think you could go wrong with either one of those two at number one.
Yeah, Paxton, he even texted me yesterday. He said, who's the AP? Well, it's just rankings, first of all, because the college football playoff is not decided at all by the AP or the coaches poll. And if Texas would have won big, Paxton goes, if they would have won 70-0, they still would have jumped. No, not that. But it was such an incredible game. And Texas took care of their business. They turned it over. Blue had a couple of fumbles, but we're not going to go down the rabbit hole. Everyone has an opinion about the polls, and that is yours, and that's fine. But I disagree. Now, how about UNLV and Hajj-Malik, as they call him, Malik Williams? What a game. What an absolutely phenomenal game. As UNLV was in the top 25 in the coaches poll, now they're in the top 25 in also the AP poll. 13 of 16, 301 yards of total offense, 4 touchdowns. That was such a big story midweek last week. He comes out, UNLV wins big, and it seems like, at least for now, things are just fine in Barry Odom land in Vegas.
Well, Matthew Sluka was passing at 48.5%. 13 of 16 is better than 48.5%.
A lot more.
A lot.
Like 6
better.
more completions, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Had just 300 total yards, touchdowns. I was able to see that game when we were at lunch before the SMU game, and watching it, I'm like, well, you had to get the feeling like if you were just from the outside looking in, knowing nothing about Matthew Sluka and UNLV, watching a little bit of the pregame going, well, how will Hajj-Malik Williams do, and all this stuff that they had. And then you start watching the game and you're like, if I didn't know that their quarterback had just left them for NIL, I would think that this was the guy who was the starter all along. Yeah. He looked fantastic. And Fresno State is not at their highest point that they have been in the last few years. They're still a pretty good Fresno State team.
Yeah, I was happy for him.
It was great to see that, especially given all the conversation last week. And I don't know Matthew Sluka. He's probably a swell guy, but something just smells wrong in that whole situation. And I think there's a little bit of something on everybody's shoe involved there, from the school to Sluka to whoever his agent is to – whatever other parties are involved. I don't think anybody smells like roses necessarily, but I think it especially stinks on the player side, this whole thing. And so from that standpoint, I think a lot of people love seeing him get replaced, and not only replaced, but replaced and then to not have anybody even think about him because Hajj-Malik Williams performed so well. He was on the money, 13 of 16, 182, 3 touchdowns. That's solid passing. And then on the ground, obviously, had over 100 yards and another touchdown. So he was great. They had no trouble at all with Fresno. I mean, just completely dusted them in the first half and never looked back. And, Matthew Sluka, I wonder what that did to whatever stock he feels or his representation feels that he has. But I don't know. I think that made his stock go down, if anything, because you saw a guy come in and play better than he has, basically, and lead the team like – missing that other quarterback didn't even matter at all. So, that was very interesting and very satisfying, I think, for a large number of people who are following that story.
All right, in the top 25, one note, somebody asked who dropped the most. Utah did. They dropped 8, losing to Arizona. We're about to get into that. Ole Miss popped down 6 after the loss to Kentucky with an awful field goal attempt at the end. BYU jumps 5 after their dominant win, despite having to hold on at the end. They dominated Baylor for most of that game and then had to hang on at the end. Oh, Louisville fell 7. They fell 7 after their loss. Boise stayed up 4. So those are the big movers and shakers inside the top 25 poll from 1 through 25 in the AP poll.
The biggest drop, was definitely Utah, but Louisville was right there with them, and depending on what poll you look at, like by a spot or by 3 spots. And then also you mentioned Ole Miss as well, dropped. But, Utah was the most significant in both polls, 8 spots in each of those. And I think it's still worth monitoring, especially with some of the stories out there that were actually out there on Friday. We weren't here. I wondered if Paul and them were going to talk about it, but I don't know if you did or not. About the SEC and the Big Ten getting together. But for the top 5 from the SEC, Texas, Bama, and then you have Ohio State giving the Big Ten their rep in the top 5, and then Tennessee, Georgia, and then Oregon, Penn State. So the top 7's all from those 2 conferences in both the AP and in the coaches poll, which is interesting. And if you want to go even farther than that, 9 of the top 10, 11 or 10 of the top 11, 11 of the top 12. I mean, it's
12 of the top 13.
Yeah, you can keep going.
You can keep going.
And so
and that's going to probably be the case.
Yeah, that's kind of where we are now.
Well, okay, so now the Big 12. Iowa State's Matt Campbell, and we mentioned this last week, is now their all-time wins leader among head coaches. And he got the win. Would they end up shutting out Houston? I believe that was the score as they dominate Houston. It was a little sluggish early, and they take care of business. Here's what I have. You guys agree or not? And this is, we're not going to discuss all 16. We don't have the time, but we will have our pod today that is K-State, Iowa State, KU, and West Virginia. Teams on their way up. How about what BYU did? How about Dion, Colorado, Arizona, K-State, Tech, TCU, and I'm going to even say Cincinnati doesn't deserve to drop much because that was a hell of a game in Lubbock. I watched it basically almost every second of that. Utah, UCF, Oklahoma State, and Kansas, they're gone, at least for now. Doesn't mean they won't be back in it. And then holding patterns, West Virginia didn't play, Arizona State didn't play, and then whatever you want to think about Baylor and Houston.
Well, we'll talk about Baylor much more later. Houston, I have no thoughts on Houston because it looks like the first year under a new coaching staff in the modern era where your roster's cleaned out. Your roster wasn't all that good to start out with. Otherwise, you wouldn't have fired Dana Holgerson. So, this is year 1 of most coaches. This is not Kalen DeBoer stepping into Nick Saban's shoes. This is taking over for a coach that got fired, not a legend who retired. BYU jumped out in that game, and it's far too often for Baylor to keep falling behind, especially at home like they do. My opinion has changed on Colorado from 3 weeks ago until now. They're getting better. They're doing the little things they weren't doing. Now, the Nebraska game looks like it was a bit of a wake-up call. I didn't know if they were mature enough to handle that. So far, they've won the last 3 games, and blew out a good team, and UCF on the way to it.
In their backyard.
With what I thought was a terrible matchup for them, but they flipped it on its ear. Iowa State's efficient and Matt Campbell-y all the way up and down. And Arizona, big win. Kansas State, golly. We'll talk about them in the pod, but golly, that was just an ass-kicking that they gave to Oklahoma State.
There's a lot to cover there. BYU, first of all, is got to be feeling great. and deservedly so. They traveled well, as you'd expect them to, and they dominated early to give themselves too big of a hole for Baylor to dig out of, and ultimately able to hold on and win that game. And you feel great now at 5-0. You're definitely going back to a bowl game, which you did not do last year. You fell just short of that after a really good start. There's absolutely no chance you're not going to win a 6th game because it would take a meltdown of just unrealistic epic proportions. Yep. I don't care who's on the schedule, but they look really good. Jake Retzlaff made some nice plays early on. He's been better than I expected him to be, and the defense is obviously terrific. Jay Hill, the story at the beginning of the year, what could have been such tragedy turning into really the leading headline for them this season, and the strength of their defense led by him. So that's been cool to see that. And their fans, they've got as big of a unique crowd as anybody, and they're all feeling it right now. That makes them even stronger to have that backing.
What did you say about their fans?
I don't know.
BYU fans?
They have a big backing.
Hey, Garrett, can you jump down to that one picture of the BYU fans at McLean Stadium following the dominant win, even though, again, they held on? Look at the blue in the stands after that game. I mean, there was a bunch. Knew there would be. So, Craig, I'm sorry, but I wanted to show that picture since you brought up the fans.
Yeah, it didn't quite look like that in person because that makes it look like it's the whole thing,
No,
but
it
it
was the whole
looked pretty
stadium.
close.
It
like
was-
that's like
yeah.
all their fans congregated in one corner.
That's still a lot of fans.
No, I'm
Yeah.
not taking. I'm just saying like that makes it look like it's a home game.
No,
and
it
wasn't
does.
quite that extent, but it was close enough. So I'm not taking it away. It's just that can kind of make it look a little bit different than it actually was. But it was close enough, and they were definitely loud and proud early on. And like I've said a couple times now, they traveled really well, which was not a surprise. It was good to see a lot of great BYU fans. I think they've been an excellent addition to the conference, and right now they're on top. So just keep doing what they're doing. They're scoring a lot of points, and they're playing good defense, and that's a great recipe to win a lot more games moving forward. And then, I mean, elsewhere there were so many interesting games, but
I mentioned BYU. I mentioned Colorado.
I said on Colorado,
Yeah.
did I not say that everybody needs to let them play some freaking games
Yeah.
first before we start roasting Dion before we've even played a game and start talking about how he's this and he's that and he's all that? Like, where are those guys right now that were talking all
Very
that big
quiet.
mess at the beginning of the year?
Very quiet.
And I'm not some Dion defender, and I made that very clear at the time, but, like, we just, like, didn't even let them breathe before we started just poo-pooing all over all things Colorado as the season started, and here they are, and they're the ones laughing. I don't know how sustainable it is, but it looks pretty damn sustainable because they just went to Orlando and kicked UCF's ass and didn't even make it look like a close game.
And beat them at their own game.
Yeah, I was sitting there wondering how the running game for UCF against Colorado's defense.
Yeah.
I mean, that was what was shocking. They made KJ Jefferson revert back to less than stellar play because they were just all over that rushing attack, putting more pressure on him, and it looked more like it was the week 1 or 2 than it was the last couple of weeks for UCF. Their defense, we haven't questioned that much. That was always a little bit of a concern for UCF. You didn't really know where they stood, and then they play an attack like Colorado, who not only beats them with their incredible passing game, but then runs it down their throat. So that was the complete opposite of what I expected, and that was eye-opening in a lot of ways. But give Colorado their credit because they're playing really well right now. I thought that was an excellent win for Texas Tech in a really fun game. If you missed out on Tech in Cincinnati, that was one of the better games of the weekend.
Sure was.
Brendan Sorsby was terrific for Cincinnati, and unfortunately for Cincy, but fortunately for Tech, who maybe has that – maybe they sat on a horseshoe this preseason. Both of Cincinnati's running backs go out in like the first few minutes of that game, basically in the early part of that game. And so you don't have either of your top 2 rushers, which puts it all on Brendan Sorsby. And yet he still almost got the job done. So I would be really encouraged by that. But I would be very excited if I'm in Lubbock right now about just how this team is chipped away to start off at 4-1, especially given the ugly loss at Wazoo, the close loss or the close win in week 1 that looked like you might be starting off a nightmare of a season, and instead they've rebounded well, and they look really, really solid. So those were the 3 that jumped out, and there's others because we don't have time.
when they had to win, won.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I think Cincinnati, if I was to do a power poll, they wouldn't drop unless somebody below them, 2 or 3 teams below them, jumped them. But I thought that was great.
TCU, that was a great response because they could have very easily
And they
come
were
out
trailing
and
in that game.
rolled over
Yeah.
and looked like garbage because they did the week prior, and you wondered if things were starting to fall apart a little bit. So for them to come out at Kansas and win was a big deal for, I think, Sonny Dykes and that ball club, and it's a really bad deal for Lance Leipold in Kansas.
We're going to get into them. We'll get into them. Yeah,
We're having
they,
a nightmare of a season.
They're 1-4, right? Is that what their record is right now? And they are in a free fall. Utah, UCF, Oklahoma State, KU, all have to be kind of picking up the pieces after the weekend. And then did you see the note about Ollie Gordon? Paul, you sent this to me, and I don't know if this is a video or not, but fans were kind of getting on him, and he went off. Not a good look on the sidelines at some of the fans. Basically, I don't want to say threatened anybody, but basically the words were that way. Holding pattern, again, West Virginia, Arizona State did not play, which is probably a good thing in the Big 12 and you don't play. And then Baylor, we mentioned Baylor and Houston. We'll get more into Baylor as the clock is ticking on Dave Aranda and company, barring something that doesn't look like is going to happen. They have Iowa State on the road this week up in Ames.
Yeah, 13-point dogs to open up this week against Iowa State. So not great. Yeah, Ollie Gordon's mad. He's frustrated. Early in the game against Kansas State, looked like, hey, he's Ollie Gordon again. He had some runs. He was averaging 5-6 yards a carry, and then Oklahoma State fell behind by so much that he was rendered useless for the Pokes, and they had to rely on Alan Bowman, who was below or just barely above 50% passing, and not going to get it done. Not going to get it done.
Yeah, we obviously couldn't cover every single result, but that was another interesting one, and we'll dive in further on these during the pods and various other discussion this week. But, yeah, that was a awful look for Oklahoma State to get blown out the way that they did. I mean, Kansas State's a really good team, so that was a nice showing for the Wildcats, and they've had their up and down moments, but that was an Avery Johnson special, and you feel good about that type of response by Kleiman's crew. But on the other hand, for Oak State, I mean, you fought back and you made that Utah game look a lot better than it actually was, but this time you turn around and you just got your butts kicked. So I think Oklahoma State still has an opportunity to win some games, but yeah, for whatever reasons, it's just not jiving. I don't think the offensive line's nearly as good as you expected it to be, but really the main thing is what we said, or I know what I said at least a couple times early in the preseason in the build-up when we were ranking teams and we were disrespecting Oklahoma State or whatever it was that people from Stillwater wanted to take it as, because we didn't have them at number 1 or number 2, even though I had them at number 3. And shoot, I overrated them as it stands right now. But Alan Bowman's just not a very good quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line. So that was what concerned me the most in entering this season. With all they had returning was, okay, but how good can Alan Bowman be? And he has not been very good. And he came back in at the end of last week and kind of put lipstick on a pig a little bit and secured his starting job back, and he's going to be the guy moving forward. And then you turn around and you have a performance like this, and yeah, it's just you can throw for a lot of yards. That's all well and good, but if it's 50% completion percentage and you have more interceptions than touchdowns, I don't care if you throw for 5,000 yards. It doesn't matter. It's all empty. And so he had like 360-something, but he had 2 picks, like 50% completion. I mean, that's just not going to get it done, and he's not getting it done, and that's a big part of why they're not getting it done. And Ollie Gordon's got to be careful because he does have a little bit of a temper. We saw that last year. We've seen it now a little bit this year, and I know frustrations are mounting, but he's got to remember he's got a bright future to worry about, so you can't be having character things on the sidelines and whatnot.
No, you can't. Not only for right now as a teammate, but also for what the scouts are looking at too. But yeah, he's been kept in check. By the way, Oklahoma State now has West Virginia at home at BYU, and then they get Baylor, Arizona State, TCU, so things can kind of open up, and then down the road they have Tech in Colorado. Let's get into the Heisman Trophy right now. It's too early. It doesn't matter. But Ashton Genty had another incredible day. Like, insane what he did against Washington State. He now is on track right there with Barry Sanders for the all-time most yards rushing in a season. Now, can he keep this up? I don't know. Maybe he can. He is a highlight. I saw RG3, Matt Leinart, Dane Brugler, among many others who are NFL-type talent guys. He is putting on a show for Boise State.
Yeah. Devin Achane tweeted that he's a top 5 NFL running back that just happens to be in college right now. And for Ashton Genty, the harder games on the schedule, like Wazoo and Oregon, and those are over. So some of the harder games, now look, their conference is, it's not as easy as one would think, but they're the best team in it right now, and he's the best player in it, and he's one of the best in the entire country. So I think he's going to at least get close. He's going to be buzzing the tower.
Barring an injury, he will be at least in New York on the day that they make the announcement, you would think, for the Heisman Trophy.
I just want to say for 1 second before I go on Washington, we haven't forgot about you, Utah. I don't know how we managed to talk like 20 minutes without really talking about Utah.
Well,
but we're going to get to Utah.
Yeah, no,
we're going to get to Utah because you were the favorite heading into this weekend and went down, obviously. So, no, didn't forget about you. We'll get there. But
I think they want us to.
I don't know how. I mean, we talked about everybody but them, and that's my fault too, because I was realizing as I was wrapping up, like, well, damn, the biggest loss was easily Utah. They're on the top of the conference. They were the highest ranked. They're the ones that are acting like they're going to just roll through the Big 12, and they
didn't. They lost to a Pac-12 team.
Yeah, they lost to a team that had a really nice showing and a really good effort from a terrific quarterback in Noah Fafita. So yeah, we'll get to that. That's not over, but look. If this is the first time you're listening to this show, you're gonna think that all I do is just like talk about how great I am, because
which is the last thing you would ever do.
Which is the last thing I ever attempt to do. It really is. I never try to do that, but Ashton Genty's nothing new to me. Like I've been following him for a couple years and knew how good he was and had seen some similar performances to like what we saw on Saturday night. But I'm thrilled that a lot of other people are now all in on him and all in on his Heisman campaign and all in on watching him do his thing, because he's a very fun player to watch, and he's electric, and he's got a little bit of everything except for great size. I mean, he's a thick guy, but he's not a real big, tall guy. Like, he's not an Ollie Gordon, that's for damn sure, but he's got everything else that you like, and he was exceptional against Washington State. They just could not bring him down, and Boise State with a hell of a win led by Ashton Genty. He's got to be right there in the Heisman conversation, and it's just a matter of can he just sustain it week to week. But so far, so good. You see the hurdle there. I mean, he was pulling out all the tricks, and the Cougars defense didn't have any answer for him. That was special, and I'm glad that a lot of people have taken notice.
All right, of these four names, and I know that like Quinn Ewers, at least for right now, is like off the radar because he's missed a couple of games. Doesn't mean he won't jump right back into it with Oklahoma and Georgia coming up. Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe, Ashton Genty, Travis Hunter. I'm lucky to have a vote. I have no idea because I don't have to and won't have to for another like 8 to 10 weeks. Is there someone I'm missing?
Not right now. I mean, like, I think there's, like, if you look at the odds, like, people like Quinn Ewers are still getting good odds.
Sure, and he should.
But he's missed 3 games now. So
because the guy you're missing is the guy who replaced Quinn Ewers.
Yeah.
Arch Manning. Yeah.
As far as interesting Vegas odds.
Yeah. And then, Jackson Dart just took a loss this week to Kentucky, so that probably puts him behind the 8 ball.
Never thought he was really going to be a part of it. I thought he'd be in the discussion, but not. No.
Yeah, but what Ward, Milroe, Genty, Hunter, and those guys are doing is, I mean, they're putting up ridiculous numbers, and doing, like, making play. I mean, Cam Ward had a ridiculous Heisman moment play on Friday night that I know you guys were doing the game, but the end of that Miami-Virginia Tech game was something else. Just crazy.
I saw it about 10 times.
But the chest pass that he made that set up the winning touchdown, unreal. I mean, just it was Mahomesy. Like, it was just like, that's a thing that Mahomes does, is dead to rights, throws the ball some weird way, and then it's a huge play.
Yeah, I think that those are the top 4 pretty easily. I think that is a group that you could rock with and not have any issues with. I think there's a bunch of other guys that could be in consideration, but I don't think you need to invite a 5th. If you did, I'm sure there's going to be a quarterback at some point, whether it's a Jackson Dart, a Nico, an Arch Manning, a Quinn Ewers, like somebody like Dylan Gabriel, like Will Howard, even though he's not really like the star, the face of Ohio State, but I'm sure there'll be another quarterback that is more of a part of this conversation as we get a little bit deeper into conference, but I don't think there's really a lot of separation with
Carson Beck, right?
Huh?
Didn't even mention Carson Beck because he had a big game. Go ahead.
I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah,
I don't want to mention everybody, but like I mentioned, like 5 guys are on that same stratosphere of not really having separated, but have a chance to put themselves in that conversation later on. Yeah, so I think the top 4 are really solid, and 3 of those guys played Texas high school football. Genty, Ward, and Milroe. So it's a pretty good list for people from this state who love their high school football. You saw all 3 of those guys in the last few years, and they're 3, if not the top 3, but certainly 3 of the top 4 Heisman contenders right now.
Yeah, and, of course, Travis Hunter in Florida, from West Palm Beach in Florida. Cam Ward, Columbia High School, Milroe, Tompkins, and Katy, and Genty from Lone Star High School in Frisco. All right, Graham Harrell, gone as the offensive coordinator at Purdue. They can't score. They are awful on offense. He is no longer the offensive coordinator, and he was at West Virginia, course, we know his history, unbelievable college quarterback at Texas Tech, but he is out at Purdue. And here's one reason why. This is from Dan Wetzel. As I excruciatingly was watching that game between Purdue and Nebraska, these are the possessions, for goodness sakes, in the first half. Those are all the possessions. Missed field goals, 4 missed field goals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 punts. Nebraska got inside Purdue's 30 like 4 or 5 times. They can't kick field goals. 2 of them blocked. Purdue scored a quick field goal in the third quarter, and that was pretty much it until a touchdown at the end of the game. I hate it for Graham Harrell. Good dude, and it's Texas, but he is out at Purdue.
So is Purdue's special teams coordinator also out based on all the missed field goals? Are we just pinning that on Graham Harrell too? I mean,
sounds
my
like
God.
they are. He's the scapegoat.
But, yeah, I mean, I get it. They were terrible on offense. I mean, good luck to him. I'm sure he'll have something to fall back on, but it's not been a really great upward trajectory for him these last few years. I mean, there was a time when he was at North Texas and then went to USC where you were starting to think that he's getting close to maybe elevating to go take a head coaching job sooner rather than later. And then the USC situation works out the way that it did with Clay Helton, and Lincoln Riley comes in and basically snubs Graham and a lot of that staff, and just they move in and there's like 2 staffs living side by side and not really the new one acknowledging the old one all that much. And you're suddenly out of a job with, out much consideration, and that kind of popped that bubble. And then you go to West Virginia for a year, and then obviously this gig the last year and a half with Purdue and a new staff there, and it just has never gotten going. And you were a big part of bringing in Hudson Card, and remember we all thought Hudson Card was going to be some great player when he left Texas, and he's had some moments here and there, but he's also had a lot of just bad performances, and that's been in Graham Harrell's offense. It's just not good enough. It's not good enough to win games, and much less get bowl eligible, or even the medium types of goals, much less something bigger. So I think this is a little bit of a scapegoat, but I think it's a move you had to make based on what we've seen so far.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for him. He'll end up getting another opportunity somewhere else, but it won't be any longer at Purdue. Somebody brought up the quarterback at Navy when it comes to putting up big numbers. He's not going to win the Heisman, but he's had a hell of a start with both Army and Navy unbeaten at 4-0 for the first time since the 40s. I saw, Paul, you mentioned that on Friday. Now, we have a Big 12 pod around the corner. It's the Big 12. Is it the North? Is that what we call KU, K-State, Iowa State, West Virginia? But Paul Catalina, BYU comes into town. One of the things that Dave Aranda said on Monday of last week was that he wanted to see the team start fast. He wanted to see energy on the sideline and whatever else. I'm almost tired of listening. And I know a lot of fans are. And, oh, by the way, there's a lot of fans that did not go to the game on Saturday because that's the way it seemed like some fan bases, okay, we're not going to go. We're pissed off. We're not going to go. But 28-7, 21-0, that game was over even though it wasn't. It was like Georgia, Alabama, but I'm not comparing the talent, although BYU's top 20. My God, that was disgusting on Saturday for about 2.5 quarters.
Well, look, the issue isn't that. Look, they it reminded me of UCF with the bad result last year. UCF they fell way behind. Now that game was on the road, but you can't keep falling behind in these games like this where you're clawing back out. Particularly not at home where you're supposed to have some sort of advantage, which they haven't. 3-8 the last 2 years at home. Those 3 wins are Long Island, Air Force, and Tarleton. So they should be beating those teams at home. They're not winning conference games at home. They keep falling behind, or when they are ahead, they can't close things out. Colorado is not the first instance of that. It was the most maybe spectacular instance of it, but this is not something new to this team over the last couple of seasons. Even going back into the latter part of 2022, they've got real problems that they have not solved yet, and I don't know if he has much of the fan base left to support him, and so it puts the athletic department in a position where they have to either find an excuse why they have to soldier through, or they have to make a coaching change. neither one is acceptable to either side at this point. And so you're going to have a bit of a stalemate for a while on people's enthusiasm with the football program. And that this week they go up to Ames, where they're going to be a 13-point dog in a place that even when they've been great, they don't play well.
That game in Ames could have been 27-3, or just something that would not surprise me at all the way they played defense. Craig?
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot to say on it. I won't say everything that's on my mind, but I'm just tired of it, man. And I know everybody else is, of just walking away from every game with some new level of disappointment and heartbreak. And not so much heartbreak for me. I'm not a fan of Baylor like that, but I am a fan of the players. I'm a fan of, obviously as somebody who covers them, I want to see them do well. When they're doing well, it's more fun to talk about them. It's more fun to cover them. And it hasn't been fun to talk about them or cover them for going on nearly 2 years now. It's mind-boggling how you start off that way, giving yourself a 21-0 deficit just right out of the gates. And I know, hey, give BYU credit, their scripted drive. That's how that goes sometimes. You give up a scripted drive. Okay, fine. That's fine. But you turn right around, you throw an interception on the very first pass. It's a batted ball, but, that's somebody's fault right there. Okay? Place the blame wherever you want to. But bottom line is it happened, and then they turn right around and they score again. And then you come back on offense and you do nothing, and they score again, and it's 21-0. It's less than 10 effing minutes into this game. Of this game where it's obvious half the crowd's already checked out. I was walking up and I'm like, man, it seems kind of quiet today. Wonder what that means. And the damnedest thing of it is how dare you revolt after the Colorado loss? I know that there was some coaching malpractice maybe. There was definitely some lack of player execution, which I don't think no-showing really supports them in any way. But that wasn't that wasn't, as much as that was heartbreaking, I don't know if that's the game that you protest after, because they left it all out there and got to overtime. And, yeah, a fumble here and a drop there. I get it, but I didn't feel like that was the game that you go, all right, we're out. Because do that when you, BYU's up 21-0 and kicks your ass like that. That to me that didn't sit well with me, but I understood it. I understood where people were coming from, because it didn't matter the style of which the game that went. It was just simply another loss and another close loss and another painful loss. And so I understood, but I was really, really disappointed in that. Because I feel like if you're going to make a statement, that wasn't necessarily the game, as emotional as that was, to make it right after, being back at home. But nevertheless, I don't fault anybody for that. It's just I thought that was not necessarily the right choice or the right timing. But you walk in, it's half full. Half of the half is BYU, basically. And it was just a total S show from the very beginning and for the first portion of that football game. And then by the end, it's they get your hopes up, get within 6, and have multiple drives to take the lead and can't do it.
They've been going up and down the field
they're
in the second half.
They're the biggest teases in all of college football, man, and they always leave you unsatisfied. And it's just tiresome, and it's just not fun. And I, am
and
here
you're not
because
even a fan. You're just covering.
I'm just covering the team.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going you know what my thought was leaving that game on Saturday? Thank God they're going on the road for the next month so that we don't have to come in here and sit and watch them find the new way to lose at home. I mean, that was honestly one of my thoughts, because if it's not some FCS school, they're probably losing. Yeah. And especially at home. Yep. And so that's just where you're already programmed of ranked team, they're not winning that game. Anybody left on the schedule not named Houston, probably not winning that game. And you know what?
Who beat them last year?
It's deserved.
Yep.
I mean, you've dug your own hole. You don't win close games. You have no clutch genes. You cannot finish, and you cannot start. And you didn't do either one against BYU, and that's what's going to get Dave Aranda fired, if anything. It's not fans are impatient or whatever. We've been all, media, fans, whoever, plenty patient at this point. 2021, guys, was 3 years ago.
Yep.
Nothing really all that great's happened since then. Now, I think the 6 and 7 gets poo-pooed on a little bit too much. They did make the bowl. That gets tainted by the bowl game and how awful that bowl game against Air Force was. But since then, it's been nothing but bad. No big wins. No big wins. No big home wins. Nothing of substance. And everybody else around you is at least getting a little something here and there just to satisfy their taste buds. And you're giving your fans rice cakes over and over again, and then wondering why they're complaining about how awful the food is and how hungry they are. You know what I mean? It's what you're feeding them, and what you're feeding them has been bad for going on for far too long now, and this is not a good spot for them to be in.
They ended up with losing by they got the game that like set off the fire was the Kansas State game at home in 2022 when they were 6-3 with wins at Texas Tech, at Texas Tech at Oklahoma, and Kansas State beat their ass 31-3. Then they of course lost to TCU and then lost to Texas to close out the year. Now,
and not only are they not clutch, but their losses are excruciating. Like the number of
at least
agonizing
they're not boring
losses
anymore.
Huh?
They're not boring losses anymore.
No, please. I mean, I said this against Colorado. I'd rather get beat by 4 touchdowns than lose like they did to Colorado. And I know plenty of people will disagree with that. I'm serious. I still say that all these days later. I don't know how it was any better that you lost at the end as opposed to getting blown out. Getting blown out at least would make the decisions a lot easier, you would think.
We will hear a comment or two. Craig, thank you very much. Pretty much just let you go.
Well, I got a lot more I can say, but I know we got.
We don't have time because we have to get to our pod, which they're not a part of this. But we will hear a comment from Caleb Parker from after the game, and a couple of notes from what Aranda said today in his Monday media session.
Can I say one thing though, please? For all of the talk about like, let's fire Aranda and replace him. But that is absolutely nothing right now. It does absolutely no good. There's no coach you're going to go hire that's going to be here in a couple of weeks and get started on recruiting. Like, this isn't that situation. But if you're going to throw names out, don't throw out the guy that just blew a lead early in the game and has now lost his last 2. Everybody wants to – G.J. Kinney, he's young and he's exciting. Have you looked at what Texas State's done the last couple of weeks?
That's all about how they play football in the
No, I know.
Side.
It's all
and they
about
have that guy who can do that, M. Spavito.
No, it's all about people wanting to relive the Bryles years going on a decade and like just give us something fun and exciting. And I understand that, but yeah, like if you're gonna throw that out there, like let's have some other options as well. And that's the only one that I've really heard. But like the timing's not great for that, is my point, because they've lost their last 2 games and they just blew a massive lead in the first half this past week. But I get it. He's the up and comer. He makes a lot of sense.
If Dave Aranda is not back next year, and if they don't have legitimate discussions with Jeff Traylor, not because he's a friend of the show and I've known him for 30 years, then that just doesn't make any sense. But Barry Odom at UNLV, but I don't want to take anything away from UNLV. Mac, remember, he was at Missouri. So there's a lot of names out there. By the way, I had a Baylor assistant coach, and we don't have access to them. We don't do one-on-ones with Dave Aranda anymore, and honestly, really since about mid-last year, that might be a good thing. Very frustrated, optimistic. The coach has actually done a great job building a good culture, no matter what people may think. We still feel positive about where the locker room is and our staff. Everyone is in good spirits, ready to get back to work. Of course, now they play Iowa State in Ames on Saturday. When we come back, we'll do the pod. The pod includes K-State, Kansas, Iowa State, and also West Virginia. More to get to. We'll hear from Aranda, not long, but a little bit. We'll also get into many more things when it comes to the evil empires, the Big Ten and the SEC, which Craig touched on for a second about them meeting here sometime soon about making sure they get 8 of the 12 teams in the college football playoff. When it's at 12 right now, that would be, yes, that's exactly what it would be, 2/3 of those teams that get in. That is not new, but they're going to meet about that in the next week. That and more, and this is 365 Sports.